Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Think Geopolitics with your host, Expat Dad. Today, we're going to talk about a question that has been asked time and time again, particularly these days with the current administration that we have, and it is whether or not the United States will become one with 51 stars on its flag. Will it ever have a 51st state? So we'll go into the short answer, the long answer, but first I want to start with the caveat emptor. So this is just my opinion. I am a amateur on geopolitics, and so this is this. But I do enjoy reading about geopolitics and getting into all that. So this is just my opinion, and let's get started. It's just some random guy on the internet just sharing his opinion. Although I will back it up with sources. And of course, if you have a comment on it, if you have a rebuttal, then I welcome it. Just please provide sources and arguments, valid arguments. So the short answer as to whether or not America will have a 51st state is yes. The question is when, why, and how. So we have to look at what people mean when they ask, are we going to have a 51st state? And the question really means, is America going to expand territorially, right? Not so much the 51st state part, but more, is America going to expand? And the answer is definitely yes. So let's go with the when, because I think that's the big one. Okay, so I personally think it will expand territorially in the next 20 years. Within the next 20 years, we will see territorial expansion. Why will we have territorial expansion and why 20 years? So the why is because it has been America's national interests ever since its inception. One major goal that we've had was to take over the entire North American continent. Now you might wonder, well, if that was the case, then how come the United States didn't do it before? Well, the reason was because at the time we had a relatively strong neighbor to the north, the United Kingdom. I mean, we still have the neighbor to the north, but they're no longer strong. That was why for most of America's inception. If you look at our history, there were in fact 2 times where we attempted to expand north and we got pushed back. Secondly, after World War II, the British were no longer a geostrategic threat, but Americans were tired of war. And Canada, the Dominion of Canada, which I will go into, knew its place. And by that I mean it understood that it had better comply with the United States and find itself as a useful ally to the United States. Okay, I'm going to say a lot of things that are brutally honest. I don't expect you to like it. There is some American chauvinism in what I say. I accept it, but it is what it is. So Canada was the Dominion of Canada was not a geostrategic threat, and even more so, it was considered as a nation that was under America's influence, the way we liked it, to where we didn't consider it a threat. Well, that has changed. In fact, that's changed a lot, and I'll go into that now. The situation with Canada. So Canada, the Dominion of Canada, was given sovereignty by the British Crown, but it's still under the command of the British Crown. So Canada has a Governor General that is appointed by the King of England. Now, yes, a lot of this is ceremonial, and it's never been to the point where the King of England could dismiss the Governor General of Canada, who could then dismiss the Prime Minister of Canada. In other words, the King of England has direct influence over who rules Canada. Canada, despite its sovereignty, because quite frankly the British were in no position to occupy Canada and B, no longer interested in maintaining Canada. So the Canadians were left to their own devices, but there is a people who are still interested in acquiring Canada, and that is the United States. In fact, in the 19th century, through Manifest Destiny, the idea was to expand not just west, but also to expand north, which, again, for every America keeps thinking that it's going to happen at any time. And I think Canadians inherently, instinctively understand that, right? Which is why we purchased Alaska. One of the reasons why was because it was only a matter of time, and it is indeed only a matter of time until the whole of Canada becomes American. So let's get into the how for Canada first. So first of all, is Canada going to be the 51st state? I don't think so. It'll first start out as territorial acquisition or assimilation. The how is not going to be militarily. And the reason is because it doesn't need to be. As we speak, there are 2 provinces of Canada that are already seeking independence or seeking a break from the control of Ontario, which will align them with the United States. So let's start with Alberta. Alberta, as we speak, approximately 30% of Albertans want independence from Canada. And I know what you're thinking, that's not 50% or 51%. The thing is that when you look at the American Revolution, approximately 15 to 30% of Americans at the time wanted to separate from the British Crown, right? And that number kept increasing throughout the years, throughout the war, but the initial amount was not that much. So just because it's 30%, and you might think that, oh, that's not a big number, that's sufficient. That is sufficient. So that's one part. The second part is that if we look at Alberta, the situation of Alberta, it's very similar to the situation that Texas found itself in back in the 19th century. So Texas was once controlled by the government in Mexico, but geographically they were very distant, separated by the Rio Grande and then the desert. Culturally, they were very distant, very different. Also, there was a time when the Texans wanted to stay with Mexico, but the Mexicans looked down on the Texans and had no intention of really helping Texas out. They were being dismissive towards the Texans. So Texas, amongst other reasons, right, declared independence. They were no longer willing to be part of Mexico's sphere. And another big reason is, of course, there are a lot of Americans that had moved into Texas. But my point is that with the help of the United States, Texas was not only able to get rid of Mexico, but it also was able to fend off the Comanche and the other native tribes. Ultimately, Texas, being practical, realized that their best bet was to just be absorbed by the United States. And they were able to get a really good deal, actually, out of it. That's one of the reasons why Texas is the biggest state in the Union currently, other than Alaska, because they made a really good deal with the American government when they joined. And Alberta, I can see Alberta doing something very similar. So culturally, Albertans have actually more in common with their neighbors to the south in Montana, than they do with their Canadian quote unquote brethren in Ontario. They're from the same culture, very frontier, independent, self-sufficient people who want limited government, and that just fits America just fine. And so culturally they have more in common with Americans. Secondly, the Albertan economy, as we speak, is not being allowed to develop at a time when the people of Alberta wanted to develop. And Albertans know that their best way to develop is to trade with the United States, the biggest economy in the world. The pipelines are right there. You just got to get the energy out and they can become very, very wealthy. The Texas of the North, you could argue, because of their resources. So those are two similarities I see with Alberta and Texas. Now, right now in the Canadian, what's it called, Constitution, the Canadian Confederacy, one of the agreement was that one of the provinces could detach from the Confederacy at any time. And I don't think that the government in Ottawa would allow that. And if they were to use military force, the United States would block that, and there would be nothing that the Canadian government could do. So if Alberta wanted to become independent, then there's nothing Canada could do. I mean, yes, I guess you could say they could use nukes, but then it would be game over for Canada. But there would be some kind of deal that would be made, and then ultimately Alberta will find itself in the American sphere. It's already in the American sphere of influence. It already is in the American sphere. It's just a question of something's going to happen in our lifetime in the next 20 years that is going to just kind of nudge it to the American side. So Alberta will most probably become an American territory in the next 20 years. That's one Canadian province that will most likely join the United States initially. And that'll be the beginning of the end of Canada. The next one is Quebec. But before I go into it, I want to look at Canada a little bit more. And yes, I know it sounds like I'm picking on the Canadians, but personally, it's just how it is. It's assimilation, and that's just how it is. I'm just the weatherman pointing out the weather. There's a storm coming, and this is just what's going to happen. So you have to look at it from that lens. Yes, again, I am an American, and yes, I do have an American bias. I will accept it, and that is why I'm open to arguments with proper sources and historical contexts. So historically, Canada has gone to the United Kingdom for support for military aid, but now the United Kingdom, not only can it no longer do that, but it also finds itself in a situation where it will become absorbed by their former colonies, the United States. And that's another argument that I'll bring about forward later in this presentation. So let's look at Quebec. So first of all, Quebec understands that it is not culturally a part of the rest of Canada. It knows that, the rest of Canada knows that. The only reason why Quebec is still with Canada is because they're getting paid to be. Through the equalization payments, Quebec is given money, and they're allowed to maintain their culture, and they're given money. I mean, who wouldn't take that deal? It's not for any sort of affinity or any sort of sense of duty and national pride. It's just how they are, right? So you might ask yourself, well, if that's really how they feel, why would they join the United States? So Quebec, just like any province or any state, they would love to be independent. I mean, we can go to Spain and look at Catalonia and how they'd love to be independent, but there are certain practical realities we have to address. And one is that Quebec does not have any power to maintain any sense of sovereignty. Now, you could argue that, well, let me rephrase that. To have any sort of, I hate to say it, but I'll say it, any sort of real genuine disconnected sovereignty. It will become part of the United States, and through that, it can maintain its sovereignty. And I think that they'll be happy with that. They'll take that deal because through the United States, they can still get their payments to an extent. They'll also be part of the American sphere. They'll have access to the American economy in a way that they don't have before. Now, yes, they could argue, why would they join the United States? They're different from the Americans. And it's like, well, not really. Not really. There are other people who are just like the Québécois in America, which are the French speakers in Louisiana. They were, after Louisiana Purchase, a lot of French settlers had stayed there, and they have created their own French culture there. Quebec would just be the Louisiana of the North. They'd maintain their culture, but they'll be part of the Union, which is what the United States has wanted ever since its inception. If you look at the attempt to invade Quebec, 1775, and they lost. So, but they'll try again. So those are two provinces that I can foresee in the next 20 years will join the United States. Another region, North American region, that we're all very much slowly but surely accepting will join the United States is Greenland. Now, a lot of you are thinking, well, first of all, well, it's Danish territory. How can the Americans get in there? Well, first of all, exactly, it's Danish territory. They're not it's not a sovereign nation, and it most probably never really will be, just because of where it is and its location. So let's go into some history. This won't be the first time the United States has done as it wished with a territory that belonged to a declining or a weakened European power. The first time that comes to mind is Florida. Florida was Spanish at one point, and in 1817, the United States invaded Florida to fight off the Seminole. And the Spanish were all about, stopping it and all that. But ultimately, they just accepted their situation and they just sold it off to the Americans because there was nothing they could do. The same thing happened with Alaska. The Russians sold off Alaska because one of the reasons why was because they knew that there was gold in Alaska, and that when the Dane came, Americans would flood it, and there would be nothing the Russians could do. Those are just two examples of European powers. I mean, we can even go into more controversial history. The Sioux Nation, when gold was found there, in the Dakotas, I believe, Dakota, Wyoming. When gold was found there, there was their own nation. It was through a treaty with the United States. They had their own nation. But then gold was found there, and America just went ahead and took it. Now I know what you're thinking. This is horrible. This is atrocious. And you're right. You'd be right to an extent. I agree with you. It's very unfortunate, but again, we need to look at it from a geopolitical lens, and it makes complete sense for such a power as the United States to do what it did. I mean, United States is a warrior culture. People don't like to accept it. The United States is very much a warrior culture. If you look at the United States today, our military are very much respected. There's a level of admiration towards our military. And in our society, the idea, I'm not going to say that it's always perfect, but the idea is to take care of our military because we are a warrior culture. Now, you can argue about the horrors and atrocities that America has committed, but I say, name me one successful nation or one successful culture today that does not have their dark side or their dark past. Name me one. Write it in the comments section. Name me one. A lot of the protests that I seem to get are from people who wish the world was a certain way, but it really isn't a certain way. And who wish that their nation, that their people possess the same amount of power and influence as the United States. And I can understand that, but it is what it is. I don't make the rules. This is just how it is. So let's go a bit more into Greenland. We want more access to the Arctic Ocean because we also know that as the Arctic Ocean continues to melt, our potential rivals could use any part of Greenland as a potential threat. Also, as the United States plans on becoming the whole North American continent, we want to make sure there are no soft underbellies through which rivals could take advantage and become a threat to the United States. Right. So, quick recap as to the why. It's been part of our manifest destiny ever since of our inception. It's who we are as Americans. It's just what we've been doing for the last 200 years. And the only reason why it stopped was because of we were checked by the British, the most powerful empire on the planet. So Cuba is also another region that comes to mind. Although Cuba would be more difficult because of its dense jungle to maintain. So we probably like Cuba as it is now, either a weakened state, which it is now, that's not a threat to us, or a more empowered state, but in America's sphere of influence, easily in America's sphere of influence, which is what is starting to happen with the naval blockade of Venezuela and of that region. What we're doing is that we're slowly but surely, the American government, is slowly but surely choking out any foreign influence in the region, right? We don't like Russia, former Soviet Union, or communist China to exert their influence over a region that we, America, consider to be ours. So now we've talked about the why. Now let's go into the how. So how would America acquire these territories? Something is going to happen in Canadian politics where Albertans are going to say that's the last straw. That combined with American influence in Alberta to get it to want to break away. This is what happened with Texas. And then Alberta will vote on independence. There's going to be enough of an economic, social, political push that is going to cut Alberta. You're going to have another Brexit. Similar to Brexit, it's going to be something like 52% are going to vote to disconnect from Canada to develop their own sovereignty, particularly as they become wealthier, right? As Alberta starts becoming wealthier and their people start prospering, but then they see it being taken away by the liberal policies of Ontario. Quebec, same thing. Well, let me take a step back. Let's talk about the UK. Another region where there might be a territorial expansion is the UK. Now, the United Kingdom, ever since it's lost, so you might think that, the United Kingdom will never be American. Never, 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 never. After World War II, a lot of British bases, naval bases in particular, through the Lend-Lease program, became American. Yeah, they're still British, but they're really American. 99-year leases. And you might say, look, it's not American. And that's the same thing with Hong Kong, right? There was a 99-year lease on Hong Kong from the Chinese, but it was surely British. It wasn't until the Brits were so weak that the Chinese just said, hey, look, either you honor this agreement or we're just going to send in the tanks and embarrass you globally. So parts of Britain have already become American. So this isn't a new thing. There's a great book, Angus Hanton, Vassal State. It talks about how a big portion of British business, of the British economy, is American. So some examples the book gives, I won't take too much credit. It's a great book, and you can watch them on YouTube. For example, Weetabix. I thought Weetabix was British, but it's actually American, or it's American owned. Did you know that? So my point is that Britain is already starting to get absorbed by the United States. If you look at the younger generation today, they're adopting American slang, American spelling, American accent, American media. It's only a matter of time before Brits become Americanized. Now, will Britain ever become a state or something like that? I don't think so. I think Britain will maintain its sovereignty, as it should, but it will be clearly and unequivocally understood to be part of the American sphere. So, real quick, Alberta, Quebec, Greenland, Cuba maybe, the United Kingdom. And a lot of you are thinking, this is horrible, this is atrocious, how could this possibly be? They'll never accept it. And to that I say, welcome to the 21st century. In the 20th century, when all these regions were financially well off, had a healthy population, were able to maintain their economy and all that. Yes, that was possibly not something that they would want. I mean, why? Why would any nation that has, that's economically doing well enough, and that remembers the wars to prevent becoming an acquisition. I'm talking about Britain, right, of a foreign power. But that world is gone. That world is gone. That whole system, the Pax Americana, through which the world was able to trade with no issue, for the most part, and not have to worry about building a military or building a navy, that world is gone. Now, the whole world bet the farm that, well, the Americans would want to keep that world because they benefit economically. And in fact, it's been the opposite. A lot of economic hardships have befallen Americans because of this Pax Americana. If you look at certain regions of the United States, we've lost manufacturing. We've become dependent on goods from foreign nations. A clear, strong example of this was during the pandemic when we needed our masks from China. That was a strong wake-up call for Americans, because historically the United States has had everything it needed within the United States. In fact, even today, 85% of our economy is based in the United States. There was never a solid economic dependence once we have expanded up to California and Alaska. In the early years, yes, we depended on trade with Britain and France, but those days are gone. And in a world in which there is no longer Pax Americana, nations will scramble as to what to do just to survive, just to escape famine. How about that? Just to escape famine, they're going to try to scramble. See, when your people are dying because they're hungry, sovereignty has a less importance. And you might say, "Oh, what am I talking about? What are you talking about, Expat Dad? This never really happened. This is not true." Well, should I give you an example of this? Potato famine, when Irish, left, and many went to America. In fact, to this day, the 20,000 Brits are leaving. Historically, Europeans fled Europe to build a better life in America, the American dream. It's still alive and well. And Europeans in the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century, we've had waves of Europeans who escaped Europe's problems, Europe's famines, Europe's wars, and those are coming back. The potato famine of Ireland, I mentioned that already. The 60-year war, the religious persecutions, World War II. What I'm saying is this isn't new stuff. We just, this has just been put on pause because of Pax Americana, but it's coming back. All this was more about American territorial expansion, not so much the 51st state, because 51st state, that's something that has to be approved through Congress. Now, will there be a 51st state some other way, as in will a state split in two? I don't think so. There is talk, I think, it did happen with Montana and Idaho. There is some parts of certain states that want to split, but that's probably not going to happen. DC wants to be a state, that's not going to happen. Puerto Rico, Guam, would they become states? I don't think so. I don't think that Congress would want that. But then again, if you have any evidence to the contrary, I'd be more willing to listen. And that's it for now. If you have any feedback, other than how highly controversial this probably was, but it's what's going to happen. You just got to look at the weather. It's like asking the weatherman, "Hey, look, we got a party tomorrow, an outdoor party tomorrow. Can you please to lie?" So I'm choosing not to lie because I want you to be as informed and as prepared as possible for where the world is moving forward, and for you and your children and your grandchildren. All right, that's all.